Welcome to Media Melanie TV. Today I'm back to talk about Only Murders in the Building Season 5. And I've just got to say, this season kicked off into high gear with these first 3 episodes. Something I appreciated the most, though, every time the show returns with another season, I ask myself, how many murders can there actually be in one building? I loved that the show actually leaned into the absurd fact that there are so many murders in the Arconia. Lester's wife says at one point, well, Lester, it's not that bad. Just, one murder in all these years. And Lester's like, well, actually, it's been more. And then we have, of course, Lester's murder in the fountain, and Nicky Cacciamilio's corpse was found in the dry cleaner. And by the way, the whole autopsy scene when Mabel's like, oh, I'm getting Meredith Grey vibes from this. I loved every single second of that. That was definitely one of the highs for me throughout these first 3. And these episodes are called Nail in the Coffin, After You, and Rigor. So far, the standout for me is definitely After You. I loved getting to know Lester more. He's been a prominent part of the series from the very beginning. And actually, it's funny because my friends over at Matt and Just TV put out a video last season about how Lester could actually be one of the big bads. And even though he's involved in some definite shenanigans that contributes to this deeper and darker lore of the Arconia itself, now that he's been a victim, yeah, he was involved in some bad stuff, but given that he is such a foundational part of the show and now he's dead, I like this victimology a little bit more than others because we really do know him very well. And yeah, we've known some of the other victims before, but something about Lester, something about this After You episode, aging the characters backwards was amazing. They easily could have cast younger versions, but leaning into this absurdity of instead making Charles-Haden Savage's hair brown, making a younger Martin Short, a younger Mabel. I thought that was hilarious that they did not cast younger versions of these actors because, again, it just plays into the actual comedy of the show, which is about murder. So that episode for me was done very well. But something I also picked up on, we were directly told that there are things going on here and that you have to pay attention. So in all of my videos for this season, I am putting together a clue corner where we're going to track all of the clues, what we know so far, and then some of my leading theories to see if we can actually guess who this perpetrator might be before the big reveal. But before I get more into this review of episodes 1 and 3, please be sure to go ahead, hit that like button, and subscribe to my channel if you have not already. I will be here every week with reviews on Only Murders in the Building Season 5, and I'm working towards my very next big milestone, which is to hit 5,000 subscribers by the end of the year. So I would appreciate if you stick with me for more TV talk. Hit that subscribe button. I've also got some other great shows coming up, including finishing out the final season of The Summer I Turned Pretty, Team Conrad, by the way. Looking ahead, I may be giving Gen V Season 2 a look. I've got other shows on my radar, including The Talamasca, Fallout, It, Welcome to Derry, and many others. So be sure to stay tuned here for more details on my coverage. And the best way to get all of that, again, is to hit that subscribe button. And thank you to everybody who has already done that. Okay, back into the review. One thing this series does well is to cast big name guest stars, and this season is definitely no exception. We've got the likes of Renee Zellweger, Téa Leoni, Christoph Waltz, Keegan-Michael Key. We've got Logan Lerman, Jermaine Fowler, Beanie Feldman, Bobby Cannavale. And we're also going to have some returning favorites like Meryl Streep and Nathan Lane. So far, so good. We've been introduced to most of those characters within these first 3 episodes, but somebody I'm not quite as sure about, Althea, or The, as they are calling her. I think it's really funny, first of all, that she shortened her name like that. And we did see her in the flashback of a younger Mabel in the building as they were talking to Lester. But why bring her in now? She's obviously a very big music star, most searched on Spotify because, of course, she starts her name with THE, which is an article, and definitely does help those search results. But what is her place here going to be? As of right now, it seems maybe a little bit extraneous. They are introducing somebody of Mabel's age, of course, coming back into the building, and they go back. So bigger picture, still not sure exactly where she's going to fit in, but I would imagine there's got to be some sort of tie-in to Lester's death and this new character. So episode 1, Nail in the Coffin, set the table. We got to revisit Sophia Cacciamillo, who wants the trio to investigate the disappearance of Nicky, who is the dry cleaning king of New York. And of course, they end up finding his body in the dry cleaner, which for some reason, Oliver was just able to seamlessly enter, no problem, and then Charles is able to go back after Oliver took the body out. You definitely have to suspend quite a bit of disbelief for the show, but once you do and just lean into the humor, the absurdity, and the mystery, it is fun. And hey, I'm not a big Martin Short fan myself. He's probably the least favorite of the trio, and I do think that Steve Martin carries a lot of this acting weight on his shoulders, but that said, I also love Selena Gomez. So it does work, and it does create sort of a more intergenerational appeal for both younger and older viewers. This first episode takes place after Oliver's wedding, and of course we know Lester's body was found in that fountain in a literal pool of blood, but yet they are calling it accidental. And now, with everything we know about the ties of this casino, obviously somebody on the police force must be tied into this illegal gambling operation, which I think is actually quite cool that they're incorporating what used to be allegedly these stables below the building into this very secret gambling room, which has been something hidden from us up until now. They've got the playing cards embedded here that had the map and that allows them entry into there. And of course, that's where we also got to see some of our big guest stars this season who are playing these billionaires, these very wealthy corporate moguls. Are any of them part of the reason why Lester could have ended up dead? Are they going there to convene about the death of Lester and also the death of Nicky Cacciamillo? And by the way, I have just loved this corpse talking to Charles. I think it's really funny. Bobby Cannavale is a fantastic actor, and it just adds another level of humor to a show about murders. And I love how they do balance that quite well. The finger in the shrimp cocktail. At first, I'm like, why are we watching Oliver slurping on this old shrimp? I don't know about you, but for me, I am not eating shrimp that's been left over from whatever event anyway. I mean, who knows? Was it sitting out too long? Did they refrigerate it properly? Too many questions there with food handling. But this set the table, of course, for this mysterious finger to be found in the shrimp. And I'm going to get a little bit more into all of the clues later. I'm going to have a recurring clue corner where I go over my leading theories, leading suspects. So stay tuned for that a little bit later in the video. Episode 2, After You, got into the flashbacks of Lester and his journey working for the Arconia, how he got to where he was, how he got involved with taking this money from the mob in order to sort of run and let people into this casino hidden within that closet of Lester's. And the way they incorporated in all of the present day clues as these sort of black and white little montages and directly told us to pay attention to all of the little things. I don't know about you, but I've got my detective hat on and magnifying glass out, and I am ready to solve this season's crime. Episode 3, Rigor. We got the DIY autopsy action, which again, I thought was fantastic. But overall, these first 3 episodes really did set the table for what's to come, establishing this group of corporate moguls, establishing the fact that there has been this ongoing story and plot with an underground casino at the Arconia, and then the tie-in with the dry cleaning king, Nicky Cacciamillo, and the fact that we actually now have 2 murders. Fortunately, one of them actually did occur within the building, and the other one, while it was in the dry cleaners, obviously is somewhat connected to the Arconia tangentially, because when we had Mabel and Charles down in the casino, they could actually communicate with Oliver, who was up in the dry cleaner. This season so far does feel like one of the earlier seasons because it is so deeply embedded with the Arconia and creating more levels of lore within the building that has played such a big character within this series from the very start. I mean, the show is called Only Murders in the Building. The Arconia is the building in question, and while they've got away from it in different seasons with different storylines, it is nice to be rooted again where it all began, and with the character who's been part of the fabric of this story from the very start. One of my biggest hopes is that they are going to leverage some of these bigger names a little better than they did with, say, Paul Rudd back in his season. I want to see Christoph Waltz, Renee Zellweger. I want to see more of Keegan-Michael Key, who is playing the mayor, by the way, and attended Lester's funeral without actually knowing Lester. I find that to be very sus. And did he actually know Lester and he was just saying that because he wanted to cover his identity perhaps as part of this underground gambling situation? It's likely. And in terms of highs, as I said in my initial reactions, I appreciate that we are getting some really solid guest stars. Some of the jokes land pretty well. In terms of lows, suspension of disbelief is at an all-time high. But again, once you look past that, I think it's fine. Oliver continues to be as over the top as always, and while he does really annoy me at times, and some of his jokes are just so silly, and I think they intend to write them that way to really portray Oliver in that way, thank goodness we still have Charles and Mabel as part of the trio, who are the ones who I definitely gravitate towards the most. I do think the whole dry cleaner situation felt a little bit convenient, and obviously they're probably not going to be doing an autopsy in their building in any stretch of the mind in real life, but that truly was a high for me. But one of the lows that I don't think landed quite well was the humor at Lester's funeral. I just thought that was far too over the top. I didn't love Charles getting down into that casket. I don't know. I just didn't love any of that funeral humor. It was not my favorite. But some of the jokes that actually landed, I kind of liked the Brando imitations that both Oliver and Charles were doing. I think that was funny. And obviously it ties into the bigger theme here of The Godfather and mob activity, and going into a little bit of New York's past and these mob connections, and then how they currently tie into the new mobsters or these corporate mogul characters that we did get introduced to already. I actually thought Oliver using Riz was kind of cute. I also thought it was funny when Mabel's like, oh, and this is how I die, as the trio is entering Sofia Cacciamilio's son's mob house. Now, I thought that they were actually going to be there for something mobster related as well. So imagine my surprise along with Oliver's when they bust out into this whole theme song for a podcast. That's right. These mob bros are pitching a podcast, and I think that was just so zany and off the wall, but I kind of enjoyed it. And I'm interested to see exactly where Nicky Cacciamilio's sons come into play. I've got to say, just judging by who they are and what we learned from them so far, I don't think they have anything to do with anything. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't even know about this whole casino situation and that their dad just kind of kept that disconnected from them. When we had that flashback episode when Howard's mom was like, oh, my son is the G and the LGBT, he's gay, and the fact that she's wearing all the rainbow clothing, I thought that was funny. But what's interesting about Howard is he was one of the ones at the very beginning who were saying, oh, the police footage showed that this was an accident. Why is Howard so dead set on saying this was an accident? Is it possible that he had something to do with it? I think at some point through these past seasons, Howard has been looked at as a suspect. Could this be the season where maybe he is finally guilty of doing something? Is he involved with this underground casino in some way? I guess we'll find out. And can we talk about some of this peak out of touch comedy? I already mentioned Oliver using Riz, but when they are hiding behind the bar in the underground casino and Charles is like, oh, I'll safari it. And he starts typing in HTTP. And then Oliver's like, no, that's not how you do it. And he starts typing in www. One of my favorite things is when Selena Gomez's character Mabel brings these two back down to earth and puts them more in touch with current reality. For me, it's giving the whole progressive commercial vibes. I do love how they are so different. Mabel is so young. These two are so old. It really does add an interesting and fun perspective. And then Mabel, when they're in the casino, she's like, hey, should I be videoing this? A lot of podcasts are doing video now. Hey, girl, you should absolutely be adding video, because if you're putting your podcast on Spotify, we all know you can do video. So get it. And hey, while you're at it, maybe you guys should also start a YouTube channel. Although I will say there is an official podcast from the show. So, I mean, they are kind of having that meta experience, having a podcast about a show about a podcast. The three top jokes for me that did not land when they were talking about permed hands, just didn't need to hear that. When Oliver's talking about, I asked for extra starch, like, I don't know that we really needed that dry cleaning joke. And then again, all of the funeral humor. Those were probably my low 3 humor moments from these first 3 episodes. All right, we're going to get into the clue and theory corner, starting with the episode clues that they actually give us at the end of each episode. All right, the 3 clues from the end of episode 1, the envelope with the blood on it, a playing card with a red backing and some circles with some kind of branches out to other circles on it, and then a logo for that mob podcast pitch, which I thought was really funny. So if they're including that logo as one of the clues, maybe we should actually be looking at Nicky's sons in terms of potentially being tied into his murder or the murder of Lester. What do you guys think? All right, the end of episode 2, it was not actually physical clues, but I'm wondering, are they meaning for these to somehow mirror something within the plot? In one corner, we had young Lester, in the other corner, older Lester. In one corner, we had a young photo of Lester and his wife. And then in the other corner, it was a current day photo of Nicky and Sophia Cacciamilio. So I ask this question: how are the two couples mirroring each other? Because obviously we have the older Lester and younger Lester, and then we have the younger Lester married couple, and then this other couple. And yes, one of the men are victims in each one of those clues. Are they just putting it out there because they are victims? Or is there more to the relationship between these two couples than we actually know, besides the fact that they are both dead, and besides the fact that Lester was in fact working with Nicky for this underground casino? And just going over some early clues as well, in the Lester flashback episode, Lester and his wife Lorraine met. Lorraine looked to be pushing a baby carriage. Now, did they get together and she had a son maybe with somebody tied into the Cacciamilio family, and there's a stepson somehow tied into this? I'm not sure, but it has to mean something, right? Then at the end of episode 3, we had a King of Hearts card, and then Nicky's Death Alone tattoo. Now, Death Alone is a poem by Pabo Neruda, which is actually narrated at the end of this very episode by Nicky Cacciamilio. And I think this ties into my big bird theory, which I am going to get into soon, so do not miss that. And then we also had the Cleanup's dry cleaner hanger that had the paper on it advertising, as any dry cleaner does. And just in terms of the victim and forensics, obviously Lester is the victim. He was found floating in a pool of red within the Arconia's fountain. And then we also had Nicky Cacciamilio's corpse hung up in the dry cleaner. And his body was obviously meant to be discovered the next Monday after this weekend. And it was alluded to that his body was probably kept in refrigeration or freezer because the decomp didn't exactly match the rigor. And by the way, shout out to Mabel for being so forensically smart. I mean, obviously, she must be watching a lot of CSI and forensic files, and good for our girl. Nicky also had that cleaver in his chest, and he was still wearing the clothes that he was wearing at Lester's wedding, where they found the picture of Lester actually having the envelope that Nicky gave him. We also had some rope marks, the white substance, the green felt from the casino underneath the nails of both victims, and the missing finger, who may be tied into Fluke, who we saw at the end with his hand up on the bar with a bandage on. All right, some different objects and codes that were present in these first 3 episodes. That wedding envelope that was found with that whole roulette wheel code. Who was the envelope actually intended for? Is that what these corporate moguls are actually coming to look for, or was it intended for somebody else? We also learned that Lester kept that ledger, and there were some missing ledger pages, and one of them was actually stuffed into Nicky Cacciamilio's mouth. Some of the bird names mentioned: cowbird, cockapoo, bowerbird, and brown-headed cowbird, and banker. I think there's actually a big clue within the birds, because we were told by Lester's wife that she liked to nickname the residents of the building with the birds. But what actually really got me was one of Nicky's lines, which alludes to a poem. And I'm going to go ahead and read it and let you know exactly where my head is at with this poem and the bird imagery of it all. Death lies in our beds and the lazy mattresses, the black blankets lives a full stretch, and then suddenly blows blow, filling out the sheets, and these are beds sailing into a harbor dressed as an admiral. I think that is a big clue. And while there is not a bird named Admiral, Admiral Byrd was one of the first people to ever fly over the South Pole and Antarctica. So could there be a clue embedded in there that whoever the perpetrator is has to do with an admiral-related bird, which to me would mean one of these Antarctic birds? And if we're looking at the most prevalent birds on the South Pole, penguins, that's a big one, and also the albatross. Then we've also got prions, petrels, skuas, fulmars, all sorts of birds. So I think we all need to keep our ear to the ground. And if we hear any sort of bird that is either related to somehow an admiral or one of these Antarctic birds, then I think they could actually be telling us who committed the crime. And I'm assuming that the same person probably killed Lester and Nicky, but they always subvert our expectations. So we could actually be looking at 2 different perpetrators here. The deck of cards was obviously a very big clue, Nicky's cards that had the map on it, and then what Charles figured out in order to enter that vault, which led to the casino. The elevator crank, that was an important part of Lester's flashback episode, alluding to the fact that he always had that in order to maybe fend off any unsavory characters outside of the building. And then we saw somebody picking up that elevator crank at the end with a trash bag. So I'm surmising it could possibly be either the murder weapon, or it could just be something that was left there, maybe that Lester was using in self-defense in order to fend off this perpetrator who ended up killing him. Now, I mean, there's still the possibility maybe it was an accidental death. I don't know, maybe Lester's running from a bird, which sounds absolutely absurd. And then maybe Nicky's death is the one where somebody actually kills him because there's a literal cleaver through his heart. I don't think that Nicky Cacciamilio was the one to kill Lester. I think there's definitely a bigger picture at play here. And anytime there's a politician in the mix, I don't know, I think we should automatically add them to our list of suspects. So looking at you, Mayor Tillman, could you have something to do with this? I think it's highly possible. All right, so some other clues. I mentioned the roulette wheel with that hidden compartment where the envelope was found. That white gardenia, which signifies some sort of casino insider, because Lester was very clear when he's training this new doorman, hey, if anyone comes in with a white gardenia, that's on me, bro. Nicky also calls Lester the Jester, and a big theme in these episodes as well is the sacrifice that Lester gave. He didn't want to end up as a doorman for his entire life. He wanted to be an actor, but he became very good at his job, well respected within the building, and that recurring theme of after you. It makes me wonder if the actual murderer came into the building, did Lester do that same thing, hold the door and say after you, and then literally walk out to his death in the fountain? I'd say there's a pretty high probability. And even though Nicky did directly threaten Lester and say, you're not done until I say you're done, I still don't think it's him. I think that that's obviously a big red herring and part of the setup for whatever this bigger picture at play is going to be. And there is such a big focus on this transition from the mob and what now the mob means. And we learned that in Charles's dialogue. He said, as the city has changed, so too have those in power. The mafia as we once knew them may be no more, but the idea of many losing in order for an elite few to gain has never been more true. Gone are the velour tracksuits and chains, replaced by boat shoes and Dogecoin. Now, obviously, there's going to be this big setup for these corporate people to be involved in something. I mean, they're all millionaires, billionaires, and whatnot. And we have the mayor in play as well. So I'm thinking there's got to be some sort of connection between them and the mayor. And I'm wondering if they're actually there to gamble or if they are going to meet. Maybe this is more of a meeting spot than an actual gambling destination for these people. And they're committing some kind of corporate espionage. And then just back to that Admiral reference for a second, the way in which that narration played out makes me think, okay, if it's not connected to a bird, an Admiral is obviously a person in power. And the only person in a major power position that we've seen besides the corporate people, the mayor, that's right. I'm just going to call early on. I think he's got something to do with this. And whether he directly committed one or both of those murders or just had a hand in it, he's got to be involved somehow. And I think one of the saddest parts about these episodes is the fact that Lester did sacrifice so much and was basically enslaved into staying in this position as long as he was asked to. And then he just gets murdered after having that confrontation with Nicky. Sus AF. Just back to the bird names for a second. Some of those ones I mentioned above, but the banker, it's not a bird, but it's listed with the birds. Could this mean some sort of a financial player tying into one of these three big characters? And by the way, I'm just so excited to see more from Christoph Waltz and Renee Zellweger. They're probably my top two favorite guest stars of the season. And I should also mention, we will be getting Richard Kind back. We haven't seen any of the other Westies at this point, but we will be seeing Richard Kind at some point. So curious to see exactly where that goes. And speaking of other returning cast, Nathan Lane's going to be back too. So is he going to be part of the murder, part of the solution, or just part of the story? But really, my biggest theory so far has to do with this Admiral clue, whether it is related to a potential Antarctic bird or whether it is related to somebody in a position of power. The fact that they're telling us to pay attention to the small things, I am watching. Another thing I loved was all of the pop culture references, and this show is definitely known for doing that. But just in the first 3 episodes alone, we got references to Dua Lipa, Laverne and Shirley, The Godfather, Grease, Charles the Savage Swagger, Grey's Anatomy during that DIY autopsy. And then Thea talking about all of the different recording artists, but then the Dixie Chicks and the Chicks and how she wasn't impacted by that name change, which is just absurd and funny. And again, not exactly sure where this Althea plays into it all, but I imagine we will be finding out at some point, unless she is just there to be some kind of big red herring, which also makes sense. And if the billionaires are this new mafia, what about the Caputo crime family, who allegedly has something to do with all of this as well? Is there a tie-in with the billionaires and the Caputo crime family, or is the Caputo crime family maybe a network of some of these billionaires who are at the top of that sort of power structure? So moving into these next episodes, first of all, I'd like to know, what does everybody think about the first 3? Do you think we're off to a good start here? As somebody who has been critical of some of these past seasons, I think this is actually off to a great start, especially compared to the one with Paul Rudd and the whole playwright situation. That was just not my favorite season whatsoever. I'm liking the direction this is going with that secret gambling room, how it's tied directly back to the Arconia, how they're infusing this mystery with the mob and the billionaires. And now this musician with the paparazzi who is somehow tied into Mabel's life as well. I will say again that Oliver Putnam, not my favorite character. I think out of all of the jokes, his land the worst, but I also do wonder if that's intentional, because he is kind of meant to be this sort of washed up, over the top character. But I encourage everybody to put their detective hats on. Put those magnifying glasses really close to your eye, because literally the show directly told us to pay attention to the small things. So I'm going to be tracking all the characters, all the theories, all of the clues, and keeping a very close eye on these bird references moving forward, because I am convinced that it has something to do with who we will end up finding out to be the perpetrator. And again, I hope you hit the like button on this video and subscribe to my channel. Like I said, I am really hoping to hit the goal of 5,000 before the end of the year. I'm on a journey to become a full-time TV content creator, so every time you tune in here with me, you comment, you like, it all helps me get one step closer. So seriously, thank you to everybody who is here, and I hope you stick with me for more TV talk. Like I said, I've got a ton of great shows on the radar for this fall and winter, and then for early 2026 as well. So I will be back again soon. Media Melanie, clicking off.